international interferences.
And inside Syria, state media reports that a rebel mortar attack on a school in the Damascus suburbs has killed 29 students and a teacher. It's the latest incident of collateral damage in the conflict that has allegedly claimed hundreds of lives in the past few days alone. The Syrian government maintains it's fighting terrorists, armed and controlled from abroad. Let's get some reaction now from author and historian Gerald Horne. Joining me live there from New York. Well, once again, civilians are being caught in the crossfire. What reaction can we expect from the international community and indeed from NATO to this latest reported killing of innocents by the rebels?
Well, the killing of innocents by the rebels actually is part of the blueprint of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's no secret that they would like to see the departure of President al-Assad, but I'm afraid that they haven't thought through the consequences of their actions. Recall that in February, March 2011, we were seeing the same scenario. We were seeing the scenario about supposed protection of civilians in northern Africa and Libya in particular, and how that became a prelude to regime change in Tripoli. Now we're being told that Turkey needs Patriot missiles for defensive purposes, not least to protect civilians. And I think it's fair to infer that this is the prelude to another attempt at regime change, this time in Damascus.
But if Turkish civilians are being caught up in this, doesn't Turkey have a right to protect itself, therefore look at this planned employment of Patriot missiles?
The problem is Turkey is not entering the situation with clean hands. Turkey, on the one hand, is helping to supply the rebels who are attacking Damascus, and Damascus, understandably, is shooting back. And then Turkey claims that it needs defensive weaponry to protect civilians. Now, if Turkey were to stand down from supplying the rebels, perhaps they would not have the problem of protecting civilians on their side of the border.
Well, Russia says the deployment of the missiles will only escalate the conflict. NATO says it will de-escalate it. The employment of these missiles will act as a deterrent. So who do we believe?
Well, I tend to believe President Putin. I'm afraid that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has not thought through the consequences of their actions. We now see that in Libya there has been the resurgence of a certain kind of Islamist strain, that it has spread into northern Mali, and now the international community has to contemplate a military intervention basically to clean up the mess that was created by their intervention in North Africa and Libya in 2011. Now they're seemingly pushing to install similar Islamicists in power in Damascus, and I dare say in 2013, sometime next year, there will be further discussion in the international community to clean up the mess that this intervention in Damascus has created.
A lot of talk, Jared, of chemical weapons perhaps being used by the Syrian authorities, but isn't the bigger threat here is what happens to those stockpiles of chemical weapons if they do indeed exist? What happens if they get into the wrong hands after Assad does go, if he does go?
Well, not only are there chemical weapons getting into the wrong hands, we've also heard reports about anti-aircraft missiles in the hands of rebels. And I think it's fair to suggest that there is a potential danger to civilian aircraft in the region. With regard to chemical weapons, we recall the discussion in Iraq about so-called weapons of mass destruction. We came to find out that such weapons did not exist. I would hope that the international community would walk carefully and warily before going down the same road that it trod in Iraq just a few years ago.
You talked about Libya a little bit earlier. NATO officials stressed the missiles in Turkey will not be part of an effort to set up a no-fly zone over Syria. They're being very keen to stress that. Although, having said that, many would argue that a no-fly zone in Libya did actually help save many lives and indeed bring an end to the conflict there.
Well, the fact of the matter is that the so-called no-fly zone in Libya also led to the killing of tens of thousands, perhaps more, of civilians, because that no-fly zone, so-called, was a prelude to a bombing campaign by the NATO forces, led by the United States, in North Africa. That killed countless numbers of civilians. And I would hope that that same scenario does not play out in Syria.
Will it need to play out, though? It looks as if there's going to be no need for major external help, official help, like a no-fly zone, when we're seeing actually the Syrian rebels really making significant gains in their drive towards Damascus. Do you think the end is in sight for Assad now?
the end may be in sight for Assad, but the end is not in sight in terms of the ending of the killing in Syria. We all know that in some ways this conflict in Syria is a proxy war. It's a proxy war between the United States and its Saudi allies on the one hand, backing the rebels, and the Iranians backing the al-Assad regime. Now, if al-Assad goes, I dare say that there will still be countless supporters of al-Assad and countless supporters of his regime, and there will probably be massive bloodletting on both sides, and that's what the international community is basically pushing itself towards right now.
And just briefly, those are the implications of what could happen inside Syria. What are the implications for the region as a whole?
Well, there is a continued growth of this so-called Salafist trend that emerges from Saudi Arabia. These religious conservative radicals who have, in the first place, a particular animosity towards women. And it seems to me that whatever happens in Syria internally, this Salafist trend will continue to proliferate, not least because there's not sufficient pressure on the Saudi regime to stop it.
You paint a grim picture. It's very interesting to hear what you say. Thank you very much indeed. Live from New York, author and historian Gerald Horne. We appreciate you being on RT. Thank you.